Hello and welcome, Vijay Srinivas, and this is the Federal's Budget Special Live. Thank you very much for streaming in. It's a historic budget day from Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, not just because of the spotlight on the middle class, but most importantly, this is Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's record eighth straight budget, the first Finance Minister in the country to do so. Before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to, give a brief introduction of our guests for the day. Joining me is Mr. Kalayarasan Arumugam, economist and professor at Madras Institute of Developmental Studies. Chokalingam of Economics Research joins us from Mumbai, and Mr. Chako Valliyappan of the Sona Group in Bengaluru, and Dr. Jay Asundi, Executive Director at CSTEP, one of India's leading think tank that deals with energy and climate change issues. And lastly, it's Sunita Kaur, a senior journalist who joins us from our Chennai newsroom. I'd like to begin with Mr. Kalayarasan there. Professor Kalayarasan, the budget is largely sort of hailed as a budget of the middle class, for the middle class, and by the middle class. What's your overall assessment of the budget?
Yeah, I think a couple of things we can certainly say. Definitely, it is a middle class budget, particularly with the tax reform, which is very clear. I think it does, I would say, two things straightforward. One, definitely, it addresses the middle class by increasing the, of the exemption limit, which actually obviously helps the middle class. Absolutely no doubt about it. But it also does one more thing, which you know already. The current economic situation is such there is certainly a demand constraint. The private consumption is not picking up, which has been
That's right.
stagnant for a while. It's marginally there is an increase. If you look at the economic survey released yesterday, if you look at it, it's almost 61% or something. So 1% marginal increase. It's been a stagnation for a long time. I think probably the idea behind doing this is to partly spur the consumption effect. I think that definitely does. One can see that definitely that's a background of it. But I think what is important also equally mentioned here is for a long time our private investment is not picking up, which is a very important concern. I'm not sure that has been adequately addressed in the current budget. Even if you look at the capital expenditure, which is seen as a one way of coming to there, which actually, if you look at the last year, it is in fact zero increase. In fact, why it was zero increase? The last 1 year has not been spent of the capital expenditure, capex route. So that is also seen via perhaps increasing. The strategy looks like by enhance your consumption, through which you can boost up your demand, and through which you can actually boost up your investment, which I'm not sure going to work, particularly for the investment. Definitely, consumption will pick up for sure, but I'm not sure this will actually certainly necessarily lead to the investment. That is, I think, definitely an important concern. I would say from definitely the middle class point of view and the consumption point. That's my immediate observation. I would say.
That's right. I want to
And
bring
the
in this.
second, perhaps one thing I would say, there's also clear marked shift, I would say, which is mentioned in the economic survey too. And also today we see one can see the churning happening there. If you carefully look at the numbers, which is, of the taking into account of the international situation. International situation after the Trump election, the tariff
That's
has going to go up. And already pharmaceutical industry is facing the heat. And that also actually partly informed the budget, certain decision of the budget or the allocation of budget, such that it's going to more focus of the domestic demand. Largely the growth drivers or the growth source has to come from within. It is no longer of the case that it is integration with the global economy that is going to drive that growth. Of course, there are certain markets you can see the export optimism, but certainly the world is changing. World economic order is changing such that it is definitely the large part of the growth has to come from within, which is also, I think, the mindful of the effect that we see now, the change in the allocation of the direction.
I'll also bring in Mr. Chokalingam there of economics research. Sir, do you see anything unique or kind of unexpected elements in this budget that caught your attention? Something that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, there are few unique things in the budget. As a student of economics, I have been observing budget for many decades. Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman has done one thing consistently, which is quite unique. It's not only that she is presenting eighth budget. I think in my memory, she is the only finance minister who has consistently delivered on fiscal prudence.
That's right. Absolutely.
Being a lady, she was good at controlling the expenditures, controlling the revenues. If you look at the capital receipts, which are largely liability, in FY25, it is down by 5% year on year. And FY26, it is expected to go up only by 1%. This is quite unique. And even the revenue expenditures in FY25, revenue expenditure basically for maintaining the system, defense, interest rate, administration, all that. It has gone up only by around 6% in 25 and similarly 6% in 26. Now, what I'm trying to say is that she has achieved tremendously in terms of the revenue deficit and fiscal deficit, consistently going down. She has already delivered. 25, there is an improvement in fiscal deficit and revenue deficit. 26 also she is promising. So I criticize a budget. It is only a question of priority, whether the government gives priority to growth or to the fiscal prudence. Of course, international agencies give importance to fiscal prudence as well. So she has given more priority to fiscal prudence, and she has delivered. She is going to achieve. Even if you look at the market borrowing, if FY25, it is more or less same like what borrowed in FY24. In FY26 also, it is expected to go down 1%. So, in a nutshell, it is quite unique. Controlling your money, controlling your administrative expenditures, controlling overall expenditure and achieving the fiscal prudence. This is quite unique. And second, the unique development unexpected by industry also, proposing to increase the import duty on gold from 6% to 10%. In fact, I have been fighting for it for nearly 10 years, because last year also more than 3 lakh crore worth of gold was imported. Of course, even half is recycled and re-exported. We have been losing hundreds of billions of dollars through import of gold over the last 20 years. And that is one reason, in my view, that our foreign reserves, we are not able to exceed $1 trillion. Then other one, very quite unique in this budget, I will be very short. Later, if you ask, I will elaborate. The expenditures also, that is quite unique. Till now, a lot of focus on capital expenditures, infrastructure like defense, railway. This budget has deviated more on education, agriculture, and rural development. So, therefore, growth might little slow down, but there is a possibility that the international agencies would definitely appreciate the fiscal prudence. Market also a little disappointed. One way it is appreciating the tax concession, but then the way market is reacting, I won't agree, because roughly if you assume 25 crore household, the income tax benefit of 4,000 rupees per annum per household is not going to change FMCG product or durables. So it's positive, but for market, there are no direct measures to
That's right.
stabilize or to boost the investor sentiment.
We'll just talk about the markets in just a bit, sir. I would like to bring in Mr. Chokowali up in here. Sir, what is your reaction to the budget session there?
Yeah, I think it's overall good, like what Mr. Choklingam and Mr. Kalarisan were talking about. It's good in terms of growth orientation, and it's good from a middle class perspective. I think for many years, I think the government has been addressing various governments, state and central, have been addressing free bus rides and stuff like that. So to that extent, this one is addressing the middle class much more than anybody else. But I would have, because there's a huge shift in the world towards AI and AI related stuff which is coming about. And I wish that the government has done great in terms of trying to emphasize the 3 centers for AI and setting up 500 crores and stuff like that. But I would have expected a little more, because we need to jump, because we seem to be making baby steps towards AI, but I think we need to do a leapfrog towards AI, because other countries are doing it. America is already, one is Dodge, but we're having the center head for AI, for example, a lot of emphasis, like China, like you rightly mentioned at the beginning, with the latest LLMs that China has been coming up across. Yeah. We're not seeing much in India from that perspective. So there is a little bit of focus in terms of deep tech investment and going forward with it. It'll be good to see how they go forward with it. And it will be, and a massive retraining of workforce is needed from an educational purpose. And you can't just concentrate that on a few IITs like what the minister had said. I wish that comes across, percolates it to the other educational sector as well. So
interesting, pretty interesting there, sir. I would like to ask Sunita there. Sunita, the budget comes at a time when India is projected to, record its weakest growth since the pandemic. The economic survey too was predicting a GDP growth of what 6.3 to 6.8% FY26. To achieve this, the vision of Viksit Bharat, India certainly has to grow over 8%. Do you think the budget, slew of measures that's been announced, the budget is certainly enough for India to drive this kind of growth that Modi has set?
In fact, I was a bit disappointed. Of course, it's excellent that the middle class has at last been taken into consideration, but that's only up to 12 lakhs, I presume. And considering the rate of inflation, I have my figures here which say that I'm not talking about year on year. I'm talking about an average of 5 years. The average inflation rate has been 5.57%, which is nearly 6%. So it's not that ecstatic, this income tax cut on the middle class. However, having said that, is some bit of a relief to a weakening middle class. What really concerns me is the geopolitical factors that are brewing across the border in the United States, with Mr. Trump saying that he's going to put tariffs, especially on steel, pharmaceuticals, copper. His health secretary too is talking about localization or of pharmaceutical medicines and stuff like that. That's a major export earner for India. And though the tariffs have been reduced, let us not forget the weakening the weakening Indian rupee against the dollar. Of course, that's excellent for exports, but for imports, let us not forget that a lot of the exports that we make to any part of the world are dependent heavily on imports as well. So, I don't think this specific industry growth, and also there's been a structural shift in India's industry. It was manufacturing sector, but after liberalization, and it's ironic, the capital formation has not been that strong, and in terms of capital expenditure from the private sector, which was really roaring after the liberalization, has started to taper down. None of these issues were addressed, and that's a major concern.
That's right. Okay, I would like to ask Mr. Kalayarshan there. I think I find it personally unique. The government has sort of shifting focus to have a more focus on the MSMEs there, because they've been talking about the private investments haven't been coming in from corporate India for a very long time, despite the corporate cut that has happened a couple of years back. Given that the MSME sector contributes significantly in India's economy, accounting for 45.56% of exports by 2023-2024. How do you see these measures impacting the sector?
See, this is very important. Actually, even if you carefully read the economic survey, it was very meticulously done by Dr. Anand Nageswaran. You carefully mentioned that, in fact, that our manufacturing has been weak. And if the partly reason that was attributed to the international situation, the changing global economic order, as Ms. Sunita mentioned, Trump effect, and there are also geopolitical reasons why that global demand that's been weak with the manufacturing. But more importantly, our manufacturing base has been historically low. If you carefully read our own last 10-year history, in 2014, Make in India, Skill India, most of the all of these policies came with the promise of spurring the manufacturing growth in the country, but hasn't taken place. It is, if you look at the GVA effect of the share of manufacturing, it hasn't grasped beyond 13-14%, and which is actually is a major concern with respect to of employment situation, because again, one of the reason again connected to the demand question. So the demand question here, the consumption effect, we see that through tax exemption, we can think of spurring economic growth via boosting consumption is one way of doing it. The other way of doing is, if you increase your manufacturing base, that would actually create enough jobs. That jobs would actually create more demand for consumption. That actually would actually generate more growth. So that could have been the more what you call as a virtuous path of growth. If you think of the current tax base of then who pays the tax, which is for India, it is less than 1%. I mean, if exact figure, I can tell you the recent PKT figure, which is much lower than I can tell you the correct exact figure of the today. It's a 2 to 3% of the population. If you compare with the China, it is 20%. And again, if you look at the tax share of our income tax of the GDP, which is a smaller amount. So this through which we are trying to boost up our growth. Had we actually put a more effort, which we don't know of what are those efforts could be of spurring economic growth, particularly of the manufacturing, that would have been actually have a virtuous part of growth. So now, this is actually broader manufacturing. Within the manufacturing, as you know, there are two sectors, which is the formal manufacturing that is called largely informal or the small scale or the MSME. MSME in the budget, we clearly see there is a concern. We clearly see in the budget and also of the mention in the detailed analysis of the MSME condition in the economic survey. But the solution largely appears to me is tied with is seen with supporting via credit. I don't see anything else for MSMEs getting except the support of the credit. I think MSME requires beyond finance, beyond credit, in the sense of the other supply constraints, the other bottlenecks that the MSME is facing. Perhaps I think we are still thinking of the spurring investment is thinking of finance. Finance is definitely an important condition, but there are other bottlenecks for the industry to boost, to move on. So that is actually comes from I would say non-fiscal instruments. Think of the non-fiscal instrument which can actually boost your investment. I think something that I see is not much. We don't know what are those other mechanisms through, but definitely that would have been, I would see that would have been the important factor had it been addressed driving the MSME. But as of now, in the budget, in the allocation, it has to be read carefully. But immediate response, I see the credit support, which I clearly see maybe the important those MSME which are stressed up. But more importantly, of the non-fiscal effect. See, I just given one example. This is China Plus story. Those who are familiar with the literature or the last few years in the international story, this is China Plus situation in the sense there are many industries coming out of China who like to get a stop, particularly the labor intensive. None of them are coming to India. It's going to either Vietnam, it's going to Bangladesh, it's going to other countries. Southeast Asia Not is coming to India. So given our trade deficit with we could have actually capitalized this opportunity of boosting up our manufacturing. Remember, even for 91 reforms, 91 reforms, Ms. Sunita mentioned, one of the promises that we opened up in 91, assuming our strength lies in our labor, because ours is a labor-intensive country. By opening up the economy, we are going to get a labor-intensive industry, boost up our manufacturing, boost up our jobs. That's the promise we started with our liberalization. For past 30 years, unfortunately, the manufacturing has not been growing well, and it's been much stagnant despite the skills, despite all that initiatives. The more actually, of course, service industry play important role. It is service industry actually created a middle class that we see today for last 30, 35 years. But if you really want to have a important problem that to be resolved, which is the job crisis, which is still impacting electoral issue for last few years in many states, I think one important thing is focus on manufacturing, focus on manufacturing. I'll just give one indicator. I'll come back to this question later. If you think of the employment elasticity per output, this is something we typically economists use in the sense what unit of output, how much employment you generate. It's called employment elasticity of the output, which is much higher in manufacturing even today as compared to service sector. Of course, that was high-end service sector, that's a different story. But broadly, and on average, the employment elasticity of manufacturing is much higher than the service sector. I think it's a time that we should actually focus more on manufacturing. Of course, we should also focus on service, which is simultaneous process, not necessarily to be as a trade-off between manufacturing versus service, I would think. But definitely the manufacturing is a key, I would say, is a driver of growth for employment. And that actually takes you as a virtuous path of consumption growth. And perhaps if you think of the inclusive growth of the Viksit Bharat that we think of.
Well, what's worrying is that that the Indian economy has been showing a jobless growth. For it, which doesn't come to my mind easily, but it's called jobless growth. Though the growth is taking place, the number of unemployed is increasing. Now, if you take it from the government perspective, not from a purely business perspective, but from a socio-economic standpoint, it is a very alarming thing because unemployment would mean a lot of there's a lot of social evil attached to not having bread on your table. So I agree with you that manufacturing, whether it's productive, whether it's productive to the levels that Europe and US have, we don't need those kind of comparisons. This is labor intensive, so we need to. It doesn't matter. Manufacturing does give those kind of jobs. I do agree with that.
Yeah, no, it's also, Sunita and Kalavarsan. So it's a point that, like, on one side, of course, we need to generate 1 million jobs a month for the next 15, 20 years, as per the Government of India's earlier study, which means you need to generate a job every 1.28 seconds. But the problem is that there's no labor reform which has happened, and because of which industries are incentivized to actually put an automatic machine which can take away 10 jobs. And that's where I would have liked to see a little more radical taxes, where if you generate employment, your tax rate should be down. So that would spur industries to go in and recruit more people. Because I've known textile industrialists who have made an automatic winding machine. Why? Because it replaces 15 employees. And there's easily that you can do that job with employing these people. So, but that's another thing. And also from a taxation perspective, like going forward, because with more and more automation coming in, robotics coming in, and all of that, it'll be good to see how to tax differently. And another thing, what Sunita was mentioning earlier, so it's again with the Trump administration coming in and things like that. So one is we would like to see, I think Prime Minister Modi is going to the US in February, would like to see more bilateral agreement with the US, because we very often we forget what we give to the American companies, right? So 1/3 of Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Meta, all of that the market cap is based on India, and where China doesn't allow any of this. So I think it'll be good to see from that perspective. But overall, coming back to manufacturing, I think we need to increase our competitiveness. So like for like, we are about 15-20% more expensive than China, right? So, and what we need to do, we need to do a benchmarking exercise and then make manufacturing as competitive to make sure India's manufacturing and MSME is viable, more viable.
In fact, I was talking
interesting.
to
I'd like to bring in.
Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead, Sunita. Yeah.
So I was talking to the chairman of the Federation of Exporting Corporations, and he made a very valid point that some of the labor laws have been neglected. They are facing problems getting labor because the laws on overtime, the laws on women working during after office hours is very it's not refined. It's not being well thought of. So even though there is labor, but there are no well-defined laws. So that's been ignored for a very long time, the labor laws. And also this robotics that you were talking about will bring in its own labor issues, labor legislation issues. And we need a complete complementary education system. It's heart-rending to see that there is no technical thrust in this budget, in the sense that every school, right from kindergarten, should have computerization, robotics. How do we do value addition to the whole field of artificial intelligence? After all, we have the brains. I mean, India has the brains. But why aren't we having a policy on AI or on robotics at the workplace? And technical skills, education. That's what's lacking.
I guess Jay also wanted to add some points in terms of artificial. Apologies for not coming to you earlier. Please go ahead, Jay.
No, thank you, Vijay. It was actually enjoyable to listen to all the economists speak about something, but I was surprised to not hear anyone talk about the inputs to manufacturing, which is energy. And energy is one of the biggest aspects to manufacturing. Of course, there's labor, but when we look at energy, one of the things that we have not been paying attention to is how much are we adding to the grid. So this probably makes me segue to the announcement of nuclear energy adding of 100 gigawatts. Now let's understand the scale at what you're talking about. We are today at only 8.18 gigawatts of nuclear power. We are thinking of going to 100 gigawatts in 22 years. That's a very tall ask. Let's also understand that the central government could announce these things, but where does the support is needed? The support is going to be needed from all the states. If the states don't come forward and say, okay, here is the land to put these nuclear power plants, it's going to be dead on arrival. So I think there is a need for people to start thinking about all these issues related to manufacturing, again, I'll come back to that, on two aspects. One is on the issue of energy. Are we making sure that the energy supplied to our manufacturing units is at the price? I mean, we've done some analysis to show that the cost of power to manufacturing units in China is way below what we provide to our manufacturers. How is that going to make them competitive ever in the global marketplace? The second is on labor. And that brings us to the issue of education. How are we educating the majority of people? I think this idea of saying that, oh, we should introduce digitization in every classroom may not be right. I think what we need is people with critical thinking skills, people with the bare skills to be able to understand the problems. We have children that are not able to read or do mathematics at the levels of grade. It has improved in the last few years, but I think there's a little more thrust that is needed. And I think from that perspective, it was happy to learn that the AI mission is going to now focus on education. And I think there are two aspects of AI also. There is the AI foundational, and then there is the AI applications. I think from an application standpoint, we could be pretty much in the reckoning when it comes to going and doing the best in the world. We've been doing that throughout. I mean, the entire telecom revolution that we had in India was on technologies that were developed elsewhere. We didn't do anything of fundamental nature in India here, but I think we were able to apply. The aspect on foundational, which I think there was a comment about earlier, I think we need to think about this a little harder. It's not something where you throw a little money and say, okay, let us see the result in 2 years or 5 years. Many of these efforts are long term. I mean, you need people working on these problems over a long period of time. And I think a mission on that regard will be very welcome. And I've heard a lot from that. But it's not something that you can direct in many ways, and this is where the private sector also has to play a major role. They have to up their investments in R&D in some of these areas. So just coming back to the discussion on this whole manufacturing and jobs, I think we need to figure out ways to make energy cheaper, energy more accessible, energy more available to everyone. And then I think there was one announcement also about the interstate transmission. And I think that was a very good announcement to have, because that will help states now to think about how they can take their power infrastructure and ship it across state lines to improve maybe generation and consumption across states and manufacturing across the country.
That's very interesting. But I vividly remember covering a report from CST EP a couple of years back on titled "No Silver Bullet to India's Net Zero Puzzle," which advocated for inclusion of nuclear energy there. How do you view this push in general? Isn't this a much needed push for the energy diversification aspect? Especially when we have a lot of stuff coming in from fossil fuels.
Absolutely. I think, Homi Baba once said, no power is costlier than no power. Right. So in that regard, I think we have to approach every avenue that we have, but we cannot hang our entire future on one single technology. I think the National Solar Mission has been doing very well. There has been the latest push. I think the one that was floundering a little bit was the rooftop solar, and thanks to the PM's the Muft Bijli Yojana, we are now seeing a lot of uptake of solar energy on rooftops by people, and that is going to accelerate. And I'm hoping that it actually accelerates, because that's the other advantage to decentralized renewable energy, is that it could actually benefit a lot of entities. Even SMEs could start taking advantage of solar rooftops. So that's a opportunity. But to say that we don't need nuclear power is incorrect too. The only challenge that we are going to face is how are we going to site these nuclear power plants? Where are they going to come up? And how are we going to achieve that? Which is where the other announcement on small modular reactors and 5 reactors by 2033, we'll have to wait and watch and see. Now there, I can see the central government actually making a push and making things happen. I think the idea of bringing in the private sector is very welcome. Hopefully they will be able to navigate this very complex issue and area, and we could see some development there. I mean, we did talk about new industries coming up, new jobs. You'll have data centers coming up. Data is the new gold, I think, or the new oil, as they say. And I think we will need to think about how are we going to store all this data that we are generating. There's the National Geospatial Mission that has also been announced. Again, data from that is going to be generated. Where is that going to be stored? So, all of these things are coming together. I think it's time we looked at this very holistically. And I'm glad you looked at that report of No Silver Bullet. I would encourage all readers to read that, because it was a holistic view on all the issues around. There's no silver bullet. We cannot say that, this is one answer to all our questions.
Yeah,
So,
like for
I would like
example,
to,
the nuclear
yeah.
power, like we all know what happened in Kundankulam, with the
That's right.
protests and things like that. So I think we also have Union Carbide issue doesn't go away. So getting private sector to come inside, we need to make sure that the nuclear energy is made safer from that angle too. And power distribution across states is actually could be a game changer. I mean, the way we have national highways today, where you pay toll and transport power, because one of the huge things is there's different electricity boards have have different payment structures and stuff like that when you feed to the grid. So center coming in and then making power more mobile is very welcome in that regard. So.
That's right. I just met Mr. Chokko Valiappan yesterday at the CIA Salem summit there. And, I think he's also part of the CIA Salem there. I think he can better answer this. We've been talking, all of our panelists have been talking about private investments, but private investments haven't been coming in for a long time, right? The capacity utilization is somewhere in the mid 70s. Why is it not coming up? What's stopping, companies, India and corporate India to invest?
So I think it's an issue which is multidimensional. So one of it we spoke is from the labor law perspective and trying to make when you make investments there's capital and this capital is flowing everywhere. And for many years I think we've been very complacent from the fact that the share market is going up, and the share market is going up because the foreign investors have come in to invest into the country, not for investment in the ground up, but more from a share investor perspective. And now that the American economy is waking up with Trump coming in and stuff like that, so this capital is going back, and that's a great worry because one is from a dollar rupee ratio, so the dollar is becoming stronger. And most of the other currencies are also finding this problem. So India has a unique problem where one is that our economy is not waking up. Second is there's a flight of dollars going out of the country, right? So it's from that perspective. The India is definitely lucrative growth-wise from within the economy-wise, but if you compare it from a dollar-wise investment perspective, the net dollar return is not that attractive. So from a global investor coming in and looking at India, right? So there was a comment earlier, why is it China +1 or China +2, India is not being cited. So from that perspective, so we need to make a second set of reforms, which is post 1991, is to try to wake up to more technology coming in, and when technology comes in, what happens, and those kind of things, So my biggest worry is that India is not AI ready. So, and we need to get it AI ready because other countries
That's
are
right.
going forward with it. So yeah. And
One last
I
question there,
think
Mr.
yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the investments, a lot of companies earlier on took in a lot of debt, which are dollar dependent, and because they found it cheaper, and now the dollar going up, so these companies are also going to face the problem of repayments of that. So that's another worry as well. So yeah.
I also want to talk to Mr. Chokalingam on what happened to D Street today. I think the markets ended in the green, but it was trading flat. Heavy volatility in between. The FMCG index has been up. They've been outperforming. Investor sentiments largely remain subdued through the trading day. But is it the capex concern, Mr. Chokalingam?
Yeah, if you permit me, I will take one more minute. Coming back to
Yes.
this manufacturing and labor,
Yeah.
I would to come back to the budget measures, specific measures. As Mr. Kaliyarasan said, the GDP contribution from manufacturing is very low. Now, added threat is from the digital, all of us know, which is displacing the laborers, and then US protectionism that is also going to affect the manufacturing. Then Chinese possible dumping here, and lastly the AI. So therefore, I believe that the budget has tried to make a note of it and addressed. There is a quite unique change in its composition of expenditures in the capital account. They have not increased it for defense and railways significantly, but rather they increased it for agriculture by 22%, rural development by 40%, and also they focus on 50 tourist centers, 120 airline connectivity, then focus on SMEs. So, all these measures are quite unique. They recognize the problem of, the employment and manufacturing. This is quite unique in this budget. In the recent budget, I have not seen. Now, coming back to the markets, hardly there was anything for the market. As of yesterday, despite 60 lakh crore of market cap got wiped out, we were expecting that some measures would be there for stabilizing. It is not the job of the government to worry about the market or prop up the market. I completely agree. But today, if you see 10 years back, the market cap was 85 lakh crore. Today it's around 420, 25 lakh crore. So you can't write off. And it has impact on demand for real estate, automobiles, durables, all that. So there was nothing much from the budget for the markets. And even FMCG rally, I don't think it will continue. This 1 lakh crore of tax concession for the middle class, it percolates down to some 4,000 rupees per annum per household. And a lot of sector stocks are going up, hoping that they will have a larger pie of that 4,000. I don't believe. But again, we need not worry about this 20% fall. We need not worry about FII outflow also, because their investment at current market value is somewhere around $800 billion, $30-40 billion outflow will not affect. But definitely the fiscal prudence would help. And even the capital expenditure, they are projected to increase by 17% on the revised estimate. So these things should help the market to stabilize. And I see a very good prospect for our market in FY26.
So thank you very much, sir. But you also talked about the infra push there, but I see a lot of infra push, particularly for Bihar, which seems like more of a election strategy rather than actual infra push the government really wants to do. But thank you very much, panelists, for joining us today. It was fantastic talking to each one of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.